So today I'm excited to share the topic, obviously, of prompt engineering and dive a little deeper than we did in class into both prompt engineering and context engineering. Jazzed about this topic, of course, because it's something that is near and dear to my heart. Prior to getting ready to start school, I dove as deep as I could into this topic. I've been watching YouTube videos, watching experts, reading documentation, all that good stuff. And so I'm really excited today because I've used all of the tools that I'm going to share with you today to also generate either the Sora videos that you're going to see like you just did with prompt engineering, or the general images for the presentation. So short lesson here, prompt engineering, it works, but within limits, of course. Too little, you don't have enough context and the model has to guess. Too much, the model's going to drown, as we're going to see. And so what we're on the hunt for today is what we're calling the Goldilocks zone. So just enough instruction, just enough evidence or context. I'm going to walk you through first general structure, best practices of what good prompts look like. We're going to talk a little bit about hallucinations, how to handle longer prompts, and then tie it all together more from a business or an enterprise standpoint and look at how we could actually operate this or scale it into bigger operations. So first, let's take a look at what our base prompts are going to look like. So I like to think about prompt and context engineering, think of these as two different levers that we can control. So we can control prompting, which are to define our instructions and the output of our format. And then for context engineering, we're talking about the actual information that we're feeding into the model. So what we know about LLMs is that they are token predictors. So the model is taking and making a statistical analysis of the next right token or the next right action thing, whatever it is that it's feeding through, and it's going to deliver that based on the information or the strings that we provide. So it's really important that we have the right structure and the right evidence, and the better that we do that is going to determine the reliability of our outputs. So we're going to stay very, very practical in this presentation. I had Sora actually do a little video of what prompt and context engineering did for our model. Thought this was really cool, feeding in and out. What we're going to talk about in the presentation today next is the ROI. Why does this matter at all? Why do we care about context engineering, prompt engineering? I'm going to show you how to build a simple prompt and scale that into a smaller system. I'm going to chat us through patterns that will help with consistency and how to fix things when they go wrong, like hallucinations. I'm going to show us how to put all this information together and really feed through into longer or more complex inputs. And then, like I said earlier, how we're going to operate this, how we're going to scale it towards a bigger enterprise. So how are we going to quantify why this is worth doing? So the biggest ROI for prompt and context engineering, fewer mistakes, that is our clear ROI. So if we get fewer mistakes, we're going to have better outputs. What we need to do that is really to anchor us in one simple equation. We're going to have a little math equation, of course. The volume of inputs that we have going in times the cost of those errors times the percentage that we have to cut leads us to our overall impact, or really what our ROI is. And of course, we need this to be positive to make a business and to make money in business. So what we're doing here is we're wanting to track reviewer mistakes. We're wanting to look at output variance. How is this output happening compared to what we thought it was going to do? And this translates directly into dollars, which translates into our stakeholder trust. We're going to look at how to make design choices later, what tools we're going to feed in, how are we going to layer things onto our prompt. And the one question through this ROI equation that we really have to think of is, do the changes that we're about to make, do the cuts that we're making, is the rework worth it? And does it justify the cost compared to the slowness, the latency, maybe the reliability of the model? So we're always thinking through that ROI. Does this make sense? If we do this, it helps us frame and keep honest. And I'm going to prevent what I'm calling prompt paralysis, which is, oh my God, did I put enough in there? Did I not put enough in there? Is my prompt okay? Is it not okay? Are we always questioning, wanting to get to a place where we can trust ourselves and trust the inputs that we're putting in so that we can trust the outputs that are coming out? So next, we're going to, now that we have ROI defined, we want to look at just a very simple, how do we do prompts? What is a good prompt? And what does that look like? So the stack that we're going to use, this is very, very simple. We're going to start simple. So we want to make sure that we have just enough, but no more than what we actually need. And so in this context, what you're seeing here is Sora's simulation of a context template being put together in the lab. Overarching theme here is don't overbuild. Start with something very simple. We're going to look at 4 key components. We want to look at the role. So what is it doing for you? What is the task? What do you need it to accomplish? What are the individual constraints or the key constraints? And then what is the specific output formula or format that you're looking for? Next, if you need to, let's say that your task is highly detail-oriented, or maybe you have something that is more of an academic level, introducing the concept of RAG, retrieval augmented generation. So you can think of this as how it goes and finds information, and then how does it tell you about the information that it found. So it's retrieving small, relevant chunks, and then also, more importantly, bringing back the required citations so that you have real transparency and traceability to the information that the output is bringing back for you. Next, you might layer on different tools. We've learned about this in our other class. Maybe there's math tools you need, maybe there's data analysis tools, research tools. Maybe it's doing calculations, searching, we're layering on Python. You're going to need to make adjustments to your base prompts or to your outputs based on the complexity of the information that you're ultimately going to be left with and what you're going to need. And what we're thinking about here is that this is an add only what you need approach. So we're not just throwing everything at a prompt or throwing everything at a problem. We're really being strategic and thinking through, once we know our role, once we know our task, once we know our constraints and our output, what are the other tools or other elements that we're going to need to make this successful. And next, now that we have our basic stack defined, we're going to cover some patterns that are going to lead us to very consistent metrics and require the least amount of fine-tuning. So you think of these patterns like reliable best practices. So we have our template, which is going to include small examples that are going to anchor our model. And you can think of those little experiences or those little snippets in the instructions acting like little micro trainings in your prompt. So we're going to take our template, we're going to have a couple of clear experiences and examples to help clarify. And then the next concept that we're going to layer on, if needed, is the concept of COT, so chain of thought. And you can think of these as actually training or helping the model to understand how I would be thinking about this as a human being from start to finish. So here are just these key things that I would expect it to be hitting on. This is also a really nice opportunity for collaboration. So I will be asking the model sometimes, here's the way I'm thinking about it. Let's align on your approach and really actually go through the chain of thought with it. And again, make sure that I'm aligned just like I would be with an employee in my business. So next, if needed, we can introduce a concept called self-consistency. I use this all the time when I'm working actually in my business and in my personal posts on LinkedIn. I ask the model, what is its level of confidence in the information that it just gave me? And so I want to make sure that I'm okay with even, not that it just gave me sources, but I want to understand where the sources came from. Am I aligned to those sources? Do I need it to go back and maybe do some deeper research? This is a really great tool, again, to help push the model itself into learning more about you and your expectations, and also ultimately to deliver the best information that it can for your output. So finally, the output expectations. Here I'm introducing a concept, thinking about even our templates and the information that we're putting through these prompts like I would be as a software engineer. So thinking about these schemas or these rubrics, thinking about downstream scripts, and really being able to review this information and review what we have done and what led us to specific outputs. And the more that we can start to think about these as versions and upgrades, just gives us a deeper understanding of what the model's doing, how our language is working, and where we might need to make some different, prompt edits and or change our process if we're not getting exactly what it is that we're looking for. So now we've talked through the basics on prompting, on templates. We've introduced some best practices. So now what happens when all things go wrong? I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is hallucinations. So in our context, we're going to think about hallucinations as missing context or missing evidence or information. And just as Dr. G said in his lecture, just because something goes wrong doesn't mean that we're going to give up and we're going to stop. We're going to think about hallucinations or anything else that goes wrong as opportunities to lean in, opportunities to do better. I asked Sora to visualize what it thought of as a data center hallucination. I thought it was really interesting how it gave us the standard data center that it's been giving us, but all of a sudden it's very colorful, it's very bright, there's lots going on. I thought this perfectly summed up what hallucinations feel like in my mind when they happen. So Again, we're going to treat hallucinations as evidence or context failures. And the key fix here is just disciplined retrieval. So we're still looking for good chunking coming back, good titles. Are we deduping things that are coming through? Are we asking more questions? Are we clarifying enough? Are we having this interactive kind of collaborative experience with our prompt and with the model? Or are we just, blanket throwing things at the model and hoping for the best when it comes back? One of the other tools that you can use here is actually requiring the model, like I said earlier, to cite each of the claims. And if it isn't able to do that, can it return, I can't answer, or I don't know, or I don't have enough information? This is another topic I've been diving into, and I'm just going to briefly glance over it here with ChatGPT with the new model. It is actually able to send back information that says, I don't know, far better than it ever has been before. And I'm still playing around a little bit with what that means and actually what a great experience that is, because again, if it comes back and says, I don't know, or I can't find that based on what you shared with me, gives me an opportunity as the prompter to go back and think about what I'm doing or how I need to clarify or how I need to change my process. This also sets up a really great stage for us to have traceable sources of audits. And so just making sure something happened that went wrong, we want to know why it went wrong, what fed into that. And then ultimately, once we get the right output, are we able to have the model actually generate what the prompt would have been to get us to success the next time? So now that we've talked about what can go wrong and how to fix it, let's talk about what happens when we have a little bit more complex or longer prompts. So the big idea here, remember the first and last. So we're talking about token predictors here with Gen AI. So making sure and always know that more tokens don't necessarily mean always better. For longer or more complex models or prompts, they actually are weighting each of the different positions. So they're putting heavier weight on the beginning and the end of the prompt. And this is where that concept of lost in the middle can come in. So I also was thinking about this in regards to presentations or listening to people speak. And typically, they nail the first line, great. We get into the middle of it and you kind of get lost sometimes, or you don't really know what's going on. And then they finally bring it home. So we have beginning and end, and we kind of get that. And then we got lost in the middle. So very similar with Gen AI. We want to make sure that we're placing our identifiers, our constraints, our rubrics, anything super, super important that we want to get out of our output in the very beginning of our prompt. You can think of it then following it with like a little index. Maybe in the middle, you're giving it just enough detail, but not too much, like we said about Goldilocks, because you want to be able to guide and focus the model on where you need it to go. But you also need to make sure that you're not giving it too much information, that it's going line by line and word by word and getting stuck in the middle. At the end, giving a really short recap, making sure that you're hammering home any of the key constraints that you set up in the beginning. This will give you the best outputs in terms of longer or more complex models. So now we've talked through the basics. We have our best practices. We've talked about what to do when it goes wrong. We've talked about how to deal with complexity. And so now we're just going to talk a little bit about the ultimate complexity, which is scaling and using this in a bigger company or for better business operations. So for our operations, Sora actually came up with a beautiful representation of what business operations look like from an AI perspective. So we have all this information being fed into our model. And you'll see in a moment, we're going to have these beautiful outputs put out. I did leave the gibberish alone because I thought that the animation was worth it rather than trying to hammer home on all of the key details in there. So enjoy. In terms of operations, though, think about this again like a software engineer. So we're versioning our prompts, we're making small tweaks. We probably have a team at corporate that's going to own this. In my previous role, it would have been probably our communications and or our marketing team, making sure that there was consistency across the enterprise. Are the teams trained with the right prompts, with the right information that I've been talking you guys through today? Is that standardized and put out throughout our process? And how are we doing that on a larger scale? Are they able to get the prompt templates? Do they understand the RAG? Do they understand the retrieval parameters? Are we able to have context prompts and context templates that the enterprise can use with version controls? Also, from an operations lens, and then the idea of being more of like a software engineer with these prompts helps us maintain tiny, maybe stable sets of tests that we can do. We can run regression against it. We can see how employees are actually adhering to the schemas. How is the information coming through, and do we have the right citations? All these things feed into better business operations and ultimately, again, making faster and better decisions for the business which will feed into our positive ROI. As I mentioned earlier, we want to be monitoring that latency or that cost of slowness. And is it the right thing to do in comparison to the amount of information or the better information that we're getting out? So last but not least, leave you with Sora and this is what our prompt engineering and context engineering looks like in her mind again. So today we've talked about better app outputs through clearer prompt and context engineering. The map we followed, we have clear prompts noting explicit outputs. So we have our templates going on. We add only the context and the evidence for the model to cite or that is totally critical to our task. We have our patterns for consistency. We may use COT when the stakes are really high. Self-consistency we may introduce if we need better reliability. And also when we head towards automation, we may be looking more like a software engineer at the schema outputs, at the rubrics. So we have a bunch of different tools that can help to bring our basic templates to life. Constantly we're thinking about it like software engineers, we're thinking about version changes, running tests, watching where the drift goes, and just making sure, even if it's for personal use, is the information and the time that I'm spending to put into this model getting me what I need on the output? And so we're always trying to optimize against that. And under that lens, trying to iterate against that ROI frame, whether it's personal or for business, and really recognizing that fewer errors and less rework is what is acceptable. And we have to balance that against the cost and the latency. So that at its core is prompt and context engineering as a practical, defensible system. You can apply this immediately today to your own personal or work experience. Two other questions that I'm thinking about related to the topic. Number one, when you combine governance steps like RAG, chain of thought, and self-consistency, how much accuracy is gained and is it worth it compared to the slower performance and more complicated process? Number two, what enterprise-grade guardrails are needed to optimize workplace prompt and context engineering, and what audits or monitoring of systems is needed to protect the brand and the outputs. Thank you for listening.